Another Splatfest has just been completed in Splatoon 3 and a lot of people have been sharing their thoughts. We just got done with the spicy versus sweet versus sour Splatfest, and like I see with every single Splatfest event that happens in this game, a lot of people have been sharing their thoughts, some positive and some negative, about the general Splatfest experience. So, I wanted to use this video as a chance to pose a question and give my own opinions on if Splatfests have gotten worse in Splatoon 3. There does seem to be a lot of players who think so I wanted to try and address this a little bit. Now, largely the Splatfest experience hasn't really changed that much since the very start. There have been some important new additions and changes, of course, like for example in Splatoon 3 now we have 3 choices to choose between for the very first time and TriColor battles as well, but overall the core gameplay hasn't really changed too much in my opinion. But lots of these other changes that Nintendo has made to the Splatfest experience, especially in 3, might be considered worse than what we got in past games. For example, one thing that a lot of people are really missing in this version of Splatoon is the Shifty Stations, stages that were specially created to play for Splatfests. Shifty Stations were a ton of fun and had their own really cool mechanics that you didn't typically see in other stages. And when a new Splatfest was due to roll around, you could have the excitement of seeing what the current Shifty Station was going to be, and you'd have to adjust to exactly how that map worked. Really, these stages were kind of adapted from the single player using a lot of mechanics from there, which was a big treat for people who really loved that mode. But despite there being a whole bunch of these in Splatoon 2 that they specially created for that game, none of them so far have returned to Splatoon 3. Instead, we now have a TriColor stage, which is an adapted version of one of the regular stages. So if you already weren't much of a fan of that particular stage, you probably won't be enjoying the TriColor version that much either. Now, out of everything on this list that I'm going to share, I do think this is probably the biggest downgrade from the previous game. Shifty Stations allowed for some really special and unique multiplayer gameplay, so it is something that is highly missed in this version of the game. And overall, I really can't see why they wouldn't bring them back, aside from maybe the thought that they wouldn't work too well with TriColor. They did create so many of these though for Splatoon 2, so it feels like a bit of a waste now that we're likely to not see any of these return. I'm still kind of holding out hope that maybe we'll see them in the future though, because this would improve Splatfest a lot in my opinion. Speaking of TriColor battles, I know that a lot of people honestly aren't too fond of them, and even beyond that, people don't like the changes that were made to them in the most recent update where anyone could be on the defending team. Now, I do have to admit, I'm one of those people who really does not enjoy playing TriColor battles, and I do understand that for a lot of players they can be a really fun new experience, but I've just never gotten that much personal enjoyment out of them. However, that's not to say that I think they're making Splatfest worse in Splatoon 3, because I can see the merit to them, and I feel like there's lots of improvements that could be made to make them even more enjoyable for everyone. I don't really agree with some people who have said that they've made them feel more pointless now that anyone could be on the defending team. Personally, I think the changes they made in the most recent update were a great step forward, but there's definitely more work to be done, and I hope that Nintendo doesn't consider this the final version of TriColor battles. Now, my dream version of TriColor battles would have actually been teams of 3 against each other, so 3 versus 3 versus 3. I can see why Nintendo wouldn't have done this, especially as it's more than the usual amount of players you can get in a match, but there would have been something very chaotic about this that I would have enjoyed. I'm just not a huge fan of the whole concept of 2v2 versus 4, and being stuck on the defending team really isn't that much fun in my opinion, so again, I am glad they made those changes. Ultimately though, I think Nintendo just needs to focus on improving what they already have. I do see a lot of potential in this particular mode, so it'd be great if they made even more changes, and I'm sure people have a lot of ideas for how they could do this. Once again as well, seeing the TriColor battles done on Shifty Stages would be really cool in my opinion, and would kind of alleviate the issues some people have with having to play on stages that they really aren't too fond of, that are just in usual rotations anyways. I personally really did not enjoy the TriColor layout, for example, of Undertow Spillway in the most recent Splatfest, and I saw some other people sharing their thoughts on that too, so I feel like I can't be alone there. I will say though, it doesn't seem like Nintendo has any major plans to stop using regular stages as TriColor battle stages, because from data mines we've seen that there are many other map layouts planned. This is definitely a shame in my opinion, because I would honestly love to see those Shifty Stations return, and I'm sure they could be used for TriColor battles. But honestly, I just like to see them added to the Splatfest again in general. I don't really care how they're used, I just want to play on them once more because they were so much fun. Another point that does get raised often is that we don't get Splatfests as often as we used to. In Splatoon 2, we basically got them every single month, which was definitely really cool, and made it an exciting experience to check in every new month to see what the Splatfest theme would end up being. But now, in Splatoon 3, it happens basically every other month. I think a big reason for this is because Splatoon 3 has another major Splatfest event, which is Big Run, and I'm assuming that eventually Nintendo will try and alternate these month by month. So one month you would have a Big Run, and then the next month you'd have a Splatfest. But I do understand that there's a lot of players out there who might not be that interested in playing a Big Run. Maybe Salmon Run isn't your thing and you just enjoy the regular Splatfests. After all, currently Splatfests do offer a much more functional reward. But I can see from Nintendo's point of view, they kind of feel like they're giving something for everyone, which does make sense, but I do still miss the fact that we used to get monthly Splatfests. My only hope is that they'll be able to continue on the Splatfest much longer than they would have in past games. After all, I really disliked it when they decided to have a final Splatfest and kind of just end things there. Thankfully, we did end up getting a lot of reruns, which was really exciting, but the fact that they decided to stop at all at one point was definitely a disappointment. I'm really hoping that in Splatoon 3 we don't ever get to the point where they actually stop doing Splatfests. My hope is that they'll repeat a lot of the Splatfests instead of just stopping completely like they did in 2019. Given that we saw Splatfests all the way up until 2021 once they started the repeats in Splatoon 2, that does give me good hope that we will be seeing the same for free. I think they've learned their lesson here. So hopefully we have some really interesting Splatfest content planned for the future, and they'll continue to develop as time goes by. Overall, my conclusion is I don't really feel like Splatfests have gotten worse in Splatoon 3, but there are definitely some improvements that Nintendo needs to make. It's still currently early days, and I feel like the themes are going to get more interesting as time goes by, and Nintendo will listen to a lot of the feedback that players have been sharing. However, I don't feel like they're going to be bringing things back like Shifty Stations, which is a disappointment to me. It might end up being that Splatoon 2 just has the peak of Splatfest. I could definitely see it being the case, but I wouldn't really say they're bad at all in Splatoon 3, and I do see a lot of room for improvement. But let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments section below. I would love to hear. What do you think about Splatfest in this version of the game? Do you think they're better, worse, or just somewhere in between? If you made it to the end, be sure to comment Splatfest gang down below so I know that you did. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more. If you want to support my content, consider becoming a member by clicking the join button or the link in the description. You can get some exclusive perks for doing so, like emojis, a badge by your name, and you even get featured at the end of my videos.